there were a couple of girls who tried to do a ritual for Slender Man to get brought to his spooky mansion where he'll show them his Lamborghini. Today we're going to be having a discussion. Today's discussion is going to be on the Slender Man. Now, it's October time. It's been a few months since we did a retrospective. Now seems like a good time to do a retrospective. We're going to be doing a couple of retrospectives, hopefully, on some creepy stuff. So hopefully you guys are ready to learn about some creepy stuff.
I love creepy stuff.
So, Slender Man is a creation of Something Awful. On Something Awful, they would have Photoshop Fridays, and one of the things that they did was they had a Photoshop Friday featuring people to create their own, like, photoshopped monster, like their own horror character. And one of the things that was entered into this Photoshop contest was the Slender Man. Now, as soon as Slender Man came onto the scene, he was already really popular, so the creator Slender Man already started to give little bits of lore to his character, and OG Slender lore kinda sucks. He's mainly just a weirdo who shows up and takes kids and has kids do weird atrocities and crimes, which is foreshadowing for much later on, but Slender Man would take kids and get kids to do messed up stuff. That was mainly the OG Slender lore. It was also implied that he drove people crazy, but it's nowhere near the Marble Hornets effect where, like, they're proxies and fucking, like, all the wacky shit that went on there.
Yeah. I also want to mention that although Slender Man went on to become very well known and famous, Slender Man did not win that original contest. I believe he came in 3rd place. I think top 5 at least, but he did not win it.
So it's like that meme where, like, everyone's fucking getting their awards and then Slender Man's just biting on the gold coin. Like, at the end, he's like the most famous out of all of them, even though he didn't win.
Basically, yeah.
So, the real peak of Slender Man is with the web series Marble Hornets. Marble Hornets would be made early on into Slender Man's life, believe it or not. And when it came to Marble Hornets, just to sum it up, because we might do a whole video talking about that, it's basically found footage documentary stuff and an ARG, like, it's basically your modern day digital horror project, but done all the way back in the early 2010s. And it's about these film students who slowly go crazy because of Slender Man, and they all end up killing each other. Spoiler alert for a really old web series. But Marble Hornets introduced the idea of the proxies. It introduced, like, a lot of the stuff on how Slender Man behaves. It introduced the pages that would become infamous later. A lot of stuff that people associate with Slender Man started with Marble Hornets, and not anything from the actual Slender Man lore. Even though Slender Man wasn't in Marble Hornets, instead it was a character called the Operator.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about the notes and everything, because even though I was into creepypastas when they were big, and the thing was still very much going on when I was getting into creepypastas. I just couldn't be asked to watch it. I did not care. I still do not care. Sorry to anyone who really likes Marble Hornets, but I just could not get into it.
So after Marble Hornets, the game Slender the 8 Pages came out, and Slender the 8 Pages takes a lot of stuff from Marble Hornets. It takes locations from Marble Hornets, it takes the pages directly from Marble Hornets, it takes Slender Man behavior from Marble Hornets, including the screen getting all staticky when Slender Man's around. A lot of the stuff from Marble Hornets translated into the game and then fully became Slender Man stuff. So if you wanted to say Slender Man wasn't in Marble Hornets before, at this point, he was in Marble Hornets because that has just fully transitioned into Slender Man. And when it came to people like PewDiePie, Markiplier playing this game on their channel, it made Slender Man blow up even more. And this would be where Slender Man would reach the peak of his popularity. He would get fan fictions, tons of fan art, tons of different variants of himself, which we're going to go over some of those variants, and knockoffs. So we have a lot to talk about, but this is the peak of Slender Man. Thanks to YouTubers, Let's Players, fan fiction writers, Slender Man is on top of the world currently.
Absolutely. And like the king of the creepypastas, basically, since he kind of got that ball rolling.
It's funny because Slender Man became the king of the creepypasta, even though he's not from Creepypasta Wiki at all. And
No.
that would be one thing I would want to bring up is early on, this was already one of the things that threatened to ruin Slender Man, that being stories that featured Slender Man. Now, Slender Man is good for, like, the least you know about him, the more interesting he is. So when people give him a backstory, like he's from Mexico, let's say, that is a real backstory someone gave him. Or when people build up his big mansion, which I know you're going to bring up.
Oh, I'm talking about the
When
mansion.
people bring up all these distant relatives of Slender Man and all these different proxies and stuff, it makes Slender Man less mysterious and more just a guy with no face and noodle arms stalking people. I think the more we knew about Slender Man, the more we saw him, the less he was threatening and the less he was imposing and the more goofy he became.
Well, a lot of like people's headcanons and stories that they made up were just really dumb half the time for him. There is one story I want to bring up sometime later, but it's not really creepy. It more paints him as a sympathetic kind of character. It's different, and that's why I think it should be saved for later.
Okay, well, let's talk about the extended stuff. So there is the Slender Man Mansion, which apparently you're going to tell me about because I still don't fully get into this because I read creepypastas when they were big. I wrote creepypastas when they were big, but I still never heard about Slender Mansion. So you go ahead and talk
Oh.
about that.
Oh, my sweet summer child. If only I could be you. So I never wrote creepypastas or anything. I was not big into fan fictions. I would read some creepypastas on the creepypasta wiki and watch some people who covered it on YouTube, but that was about it. And unfortunately, with some of those YouTube videos and looking up art about the Slender Mansion, and the Slender Mansion, like, doesn't really have any defined features, and basically, it's just all of the creepypasta characters live in this mansion owned by Slender Man. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me how the fuck they all get along, because they definitely wouldn't, especially because you've got Jane the killer and Jeff the killer living together in the same house. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. But it exists. And usually any new creepypasta, especially like people's fan characters, would go to live in the mansion.
So basically the mansion is like everyone's big fucking
It's basically the
everyone's
hub.
big YouTuber house. Like all
Yes.
the creepypasta characters live together.
Yes. And I guess it really kind of depended on who was writing the story with the Slender Mansion with their characters, because usually you have like the main ones that are there, like Been Drowned, Sonic.exe, Jeff the Killer, Tiki Toby, his proxies, Jane, Clockwork, a lot of basic ones. But you'd also have a lot of them substituted out for others that people preferred more, and some that were apparently just banned from the house, and they would be banned for stupid reasons, like kept trying to kill someone, but then in like the same story, people would still be allowed in the house. They were actively trying to kill other members of the house. It was just a hodgepodge, and it was terrible. I honestly don't know how you missed it, because it was a big part of the creepypasta shit from what I saw.
Well, to be honest, I got most of my stuff from the creepypasta wiki. I didn't go on Wattpad, so I never
I didn't
really
either.
got onto that side of the fandom. But
Oh god, no, I did not go to Wattpad.
I guess now we can transition over to the Slender Man spin-off characters. And the one that I'm going to introduce is the one that I know, and the one that I'm qualified to talk about, and then you can talk about the other ones. I want to start with Slender Man. Slender Man was made at the peak of Slender Man being creepy, and it was basically made to take the piss out of Slender Man. He has a bright, sunshiny appearance. He has bright colors all over him. He's just a goofy guy with a big smile. But even in the introduction of him, like, he still is seen as a killer, and he still does kill people, but he's really goofy and silly looking. So he's like the first, as far as I can tell, parody character of Slender Man, like someone purposely made to make fun of Slender Man. He wouldn't be the last one, but he's definitely the first one, as far as I'm aware of.
Yeah, I believe he's the first one. But after him, the next one I know of is the Slender Man, which I like solely as a meme, which is just Slender Man's trendy brother, basically, or cousin, or something like that. He's keeping up, he's hip, he's modern. I think often he was drawn as a hipster, because it was that time period. And then there's a bunch of other variations, but only a couple have come to the top of my head, and one of those is unfortunately Offender Man, and I don't really want to go into him, but he was gross, and I don't know why he exists.
He's the Weinstein Slender Man. Let's just keep it at that. When it comes to Slender Man, it wasn't enough that there were characters made to parody it or made to spin off it. There would also be characters that were directly inspired by Slender Man. And Enderman is a good one to bring up. He's inspired by Slender Man.
It's kind of weird, because if Slender Man didn't exist, we wouldn't have this iconic character in Minecraft, which is just very odd to me.
There was Slender Man's appearance in My Little Pony. There was, of course, people said Slender Man was in Gravity Falls. You could kind of say that the Candyman guy is Slender Man, but I don't know if I would. People tried to say that the weird black demon guy from Billy and Mandy is what Slender Man ripped off. I think they're just both Lovecraftian type creatures, and it's totally coincidental.
Yeah.
There's Baldy from Baldy's Basics. He doesn't look like Slender Man, but his game is basically Slender Man. There's the Looksee. There's the villains from Doctor Who that look just like Slender Man. There's all of the knockoff Slender Man horror movies that couldn't get the rights to say Slender Man. There's been, I'm pretty sure, a Slender Man parody or Slender Man knockoff on Supernatural. Could be wrong on that.
The Hologast, I think they were called, from Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, which were basically just Slender Man.
Everyone got their fill of royalty-free Slender Man. There was a lot of people who wanted to use Slender Man, but because of the copyrights being all up in the air, no one really knew who could use Slender Man. And that leads us to the movies. All of the Slender Man movies are shit. Every single one of them. But the one that is mainly the one that we all bring up is the one made by Sony. It's really bad. You shouldn't watch it. It's not so bad it's good. It's just bad. Fucking people talk like they're 40-year-old men writing like fucking teenage girls. The action is non-existent. It's boring. It's just a lame fucking knockoff of Marble Hornets. Like, it seems like Marble Hornets was the peak of Slender Man being in shit, and then everything else was just downhill from there. There's a lot of body horror in that movie, which I think that could have worked if it was like fucking, if it was more like, fucked up body horror, but it's more basic fucking CGI goopy shit. It's lame ass body horror, like someone's face will morph for like 2 seconds. Really
Yeah.
lame, corny jump scares, no substance. We hardly even get to fucking see the Slender Man in the movie, and it just ends on the stupidest note. It's not even worth watching. And that's really what I would say about all the Slender Man movies. I don't think there's been a Slender Man movie really worth the title. And if it were up to me, I would say that they should try to do a show called like Creepypasta or like fucking Tales of Creepypasta, where it's like Tales from the Crypt and Slender Man's just an episode. I think that would probably be the best way to do Slender Man, is like a short horror fiction thing posed as an actual documentary. You know, like how Slender Man was introduced instead of these fucking faux documentaries like Marble Hornets. Like Marble Hornets worked because it was the first of its kind, but it's not really that good, and all the knockoffs make it even worse.
Yeah, honestly. I think something like that would be the best way to do it, but I think uh, it really depends on the person writing it, because it can easily just be as bad as the movies.
So, even though Slender Man is a fictional character, he has been in video games, he's been in movies, he's been in music, epic rap battles, a creepypasta, anybody. Slender Man is an obviously fake character, but because little Timmy grew up on the internet and he doesn't know any better, he's not aware that just some shit poster made this up on something awful. So there came the people who tried to prove Slender Man existed. They tried to summon Slender Man, if that can even be done. They went out into the woods, which is a very bad idea, because there are other men in the woods trying to find you that aren't Slender Man. But these people would try to summon Slender Man Bloody Mary style, or they would try to do stupid stuff to become his proxies. There were a couple of girls who tried to do a ritual for Slender Man to get brought to his spooky mansion, where he'll show them his Lamborghini and they'll get to meet Jeff the Killer. But they just ended up stabbing their friend like 20 times and then trying to kill her. And the friend survived. These girls are lunatics and they got put away for a while. And it reminded everybody that the things that we remember being created are now so old that little kids don't realize that it's fake. Like, there's kids who believe in Sonic.exe. There are kids who believe in Tails Doll. There are kids who believe in Slender Man and Jeff the Killer. Even though we remember this shit being written and the multiple different versions of it that they don't know because they only know the mainstream version of the characters, Slender Man became that. And the thing is like, the Slender Man we remember is not the Slender Man that actually exists. There is no Slender Man story. There is no Slender Man lore. Hell, I debate even calling Slender Man a creepypasta character. Slender Man is an internet cryptid. That is it. He has no one story. He has no one narrative. He has no one lore. He has no one power set. He's an amalgamation of things that people worked into one character. Unlike with Jeff the Killer, there's no original author. There's no, like, original framework for Slender Man. There's no Slender Bible. The guy who made Slender Man gave us so little to work with that the internet had to fill in everything else. And it's basically like a test. You show Slender Man to someone, and you'll probably get a different answer to what he is to them. And I think that speaks to Slender Man's like long-lasting legacy, but it also speaks to the fact that the internet will adapt and change things. And 10 years from now, Slender Man will probably be completely different than what he is now. And he'll be even different than what he was 20 years beforehand. It's really interesting to see horror characters that are not limited to like big corporations who pick exactly what is canon to them. Instead, you get something weird and unconventional like Slender Man.
Yeah, and speaking of that, actually, I think now I want to bring up that story that made Slenderman into more of a sympathetic character. I don't remember the name of it, but I'm pretty sure in the story, and it was part of the title, I believe, Slenderman's name was like Herbert or something like that. And basically, he was born with like I think a skin condition, just some kind of birth defect that made him look different. And because of that, he either opted to live in the woods or he was kind of forced to live in the woods by the townspeople he lived with. And he became kind of an urban legend for the children in the town that would go and kind of mess with the dude. Uh, and one day, children just start going missing, and everyone starts blaming the dude out in the woods, the creepy dude. And they kind of, I believe they attack him when he comes into town, or they drag him into town, and they're blaming him. And it turns out that I believe it was the mayor, or it just someone in town had been kidnapping these children and hiding them in his basement, and one manages to escape. And I believe Herbert went in the house somehow. I believe the house somehow catches on fire, and he goes running in to save all of the children, and manages to save them, and either dies in the fire or goes back out to live in the woods. And I believe if he went back to live in the woods, he got burned, but I don't really remember the story too well. So I read it back in like 2014, I want to say. So it's been a while. I can't remember the name for the life of me.
To me, that just reflects what I was saying earlier. Slenderman shouldn't really be considered a creepypasta character. Slenderman shouldn't be put up to the likes of Jeff the Killer, because Slenderman is more of a cryptid. Bigfoot doesn't have a definitive origin story. Bigfoot doesn't really have a set, descriptive of what it is. Like, Bigfoot has been described as either a Neanderthal, some type of new creature we've never discovered, a complete hoax. That's what Slenderman is to me. Slenderman is just a thing seen in photographs. There's no explaining what it is. There's no real fucking concrete idea to what it is. He's not from Mexico. He's not some burn victim. He's just a weirdo. And all we know is that he has some weird connection to children. I think going all the way back to the root of Slenderman, what we had in the beginning was more interesting than what we got. I think the proxies are lame personally. I think the idea of Slenderman just stalking you and driving you crazy to get you to kill yourself is lame. I think Slenderman is more interesting when all he does is just observe people, and the people around him go crazy because he's watching them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting takes on him, honestly. I think when you try to flesh him out more, it kind of ruins it. And when you try to give him stuff like proxies, you get the Slender Mansion. And you don't want the Slender Mansion.
I see Slenderman as a Lovecraftian creature. And one of the things with Lovecraft is the fear of the unknown. And one of the most, prominent things that people fear is the man out in the woods. The thing in the corner of your eye. The figure that you think you saw. Slenderman is that. Slenderman is the embodiment of being followed, being stalked, seeing something that's not there. And I think that will always be more terrifying than some spooky guy that you summon via a ritual and then you get to live in his McMansion. Slenderman, as a concept, will always be more terrifying than Slenderman, the meme.